In the world, there is a constant phenomena of French people rioting and protesting. And the French, from what I have heard, the French love to protest. They love to protest. They protest all the time about anything from the age of retirement to getting more days off or whatever. They love to protest. And they love revolution. They love revolution. And they don't mind violent revolution. Like in America, we talk about the American Revolution. I don't think Americans talk about the American Revolution as much as the French talk about their own revolution. And we we kind of pasteurize the American Revolution. We talk about like Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. We're like, oh yes, these noble men with wigs, and how they were gentlemen, and how much how noble they were and how righteous they were, and depending on who you talk to, you'll hear about how Christian they were, how religious they were, although that's heavily in dispute. Well, not so much anymore, but it used to be a very, very high point of contention in America about the religiosity of the founding fathers. That was definitely an intense argument in the early 2000s and also in the 20 teens, but nowadays I don't hear about that anymore. But in France, they don't mind talking about violent revolution, and they don't mind boasting about how violent their revolution was. Like they love it. The guillotine and all the decapitations. Now they will minimize some of the violence. Like for example, I've never heard any French people boast about the fact that there was cannibalism in the streets of France during their beloved revolution. But nonetheless, they will celebrate the guillotines. They don't mind that at all. The French love revolution. And I have been reading about their ancient ancestors, the Gauls. And I have been reading specifically Caesar's account of his conquest of Gaul, which has been, I must say, a fascinating read. A very fascinating read. I love reading these ancient Greco-Roman histories. I read Thucydides, I read Josephus. Very fascinating read. So now I'm reading this. And Julius Caesar will talk about how the Gauls of ancient France, how much they loved revolution. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I bet you never heard of this. So check this out. Very interesting. So it talks about how the Gauls fought back against Roman expansionism. The Romans wanted to conquer Gaul. Why? Well, we can talk about the resources, right? Gaul had a lot of fertile ground. You could grow a lot of wheat in Gaul. You could also raise a lot of vineyards in Gaul. You know, the French are famous for their wine, but it wasn't always that way. Who introduced wine to the Gauls? Was it not the Greeks and the Romans? And in fact, there were some Gauls who were vehemently against the consumption of wine. And they argued that if you drink wine, it will make you weak. It'll make you weak in mind. So they were kind of like some Jack Donovans walking around in ancient Gaul talking about, certain things make you weak. Stay away from it. There were probably some ancient Jordan Petersons roaming around in Gaul. Don't drink wine; it'll make you weak in mind. It'll make you weak. Drinking wine will make you weak. But the Romans wanted to take over Gaul because, not just because of the good soil there, but there was geopolitical reasons why. It was to protect the Roman Empire, because the Romans had a territory in Gaul. It was called Provence, the province, Provençal, and that was Rome's territory in Gaul. It was in southern Gaul, southern France, and you had these barbarian Gauls and you had these Germanians who were getting closer and closer to Rome's province in southern Gaul, and the Romans didn't want that. So they decided just to take over all of Gaul. Same reason why Rome invaded Britain. Why did Julius Caesar invade Britain? Julius Caesar talks about why he invaded Britain. It was because a lot of the times when the Romans had to fight the Gauls would bring in reinforcements from Britain, because the ancient inhabitants of ancient Britain were the same people as the ancient inhabitants of Gaul. They were the same people. In fact, Julius Caesar talks about a king, a Gaulish king named Diviciacus. And Diviciacus was a king who had territory in both Gaul and Britain. They were both Celts, same people. Julius Caesar also talks about the Gauls' love of revolution. And I'll give you guys an example right here. So Julius Caesar talks about how when the Gauls were going to fight back against the Romans, they were Gauls who hated the idea of being under the control of Rome, because they believed that if the Romans controlled them, then they wouldn't be able to do revolutions as easily, because when they were living under their own people, it was a lot easier to do revolutions. And it says here, there were also some adventurers who saw that under Roman rule, they would not find it so easy to usurp thrones, as was commonly done in Gaul by powerful men and by those who could afford to hire mercenaries. So the love of revolution motivated a lot of the Gauls to resist Rome, because they knew that if they were under Roman control, it would not be as easy to do a revolution. And there's another part here that talks about this. So Julius Caesar says here, nearly all the Gauls were fond of political change and quickly and easily provoked to war. They love political change. They love revolution. Kind of like how they loved the Enlightenment, which was a revolutionary a revolutionary paradigm, given the fact that the Enlightenment was heavily influenced by Freemasonry, the creed of which was the end of all monarchies and all religious institutions. That's why the Turks who did a revolution against the Sultan were Freemasons, and the people who were influencing the French Revolution were Freemasons. The ones who did the American Revolution were also Freemasons. That's why we got all that Masonic imagery on our dollar and also in a lot of our old American architecture in our capital city. So we have something else here. So Julius Caesar talks about this ancient Gaulish tribe called the Lexovi. Sounds French enough, right? Lexovi. Lexovi, and how they were under a rebel leader by the name of Viridovix. Viridovix was the commander-in-chief of all the rebel tribes. And there were two tribes that went under his control. One tribe was called the Aulersi Eburovices, and there was also the Lexovi. And it says here that the Aulersi, Eburovisus, and Alexovi massacred their counselors because they would not sanction the policy of going to war. So these two Gaulish tribes, the Aulersi and the Lexovi, they said, we want to go to war with the Romans, and their politicians said, well, no, that's not a very good idea, because they knew they were going to get their asses kicked. And they said, you not go to war with the Romans, we will kill you. So they killed their politicians. I mean, it sounds like a pretty French thing to do. It sounds very revolutionary. It reminds me of what Josephus described in his history on the Roman-Jewish War. He talked about how there were the Jews who wanted war with Rome, and then there were the Jews who didn't want war with Rome. And the Jews who did not want war with Rome were actually in the majority. They were in the majority, and a lot of those people died. A lot of those people were massacred by the rebels. Also reminds me of Syria. You have the rebels, the rebel faction, and then you have the majority of Syrians who don't want rebellion, and those Syrians got massacred by rebels. Beheaded, executed, you name it. It happened. So there's that. So that's it. I'm pretty certain I'll find some more examples of this as I read on. I'm trying to finish this book. But there you have it. Julius Caesar describes the ancient ancestors of the French as people who love political change and people who love revolution. He talks about certain Gauls who did not want to be under Roman rule because they knew that they wouldn't be able to do revolutions as easily under Roman control. And he talks about how the Gauls were people who loved revolution. They loved revolt. They loved political change. And in one instance, they literally murdered their own politicians because those politicians weren't interested in a war with Rome. So there you go. Nothing is really new under the sun. And French Revolution was just sort of a product of their... a product of a culture that has been in France since antiquity. So there you have it. Very interesting. I find that quite fascinating. And, we literally saw this in 2018. We saw the, I think it was 2018, 2019. We saw the phenomena of the yellow vests in France. That was interesting, I must say. Very interesting. Because they were the yellow vesters. Yeah, 2018. And that yellow vest movement was huge. I mean, you would literally see tens of thousands of people in the streets of France rioting, protesting, fighting the police. There was one video I remember seeing of a yellow vester literally punching a cop. They said, he was boxing with an officer. No. He wasn't boxing with the officer. He was punching this cop. Cop wasn't boxing, okay? It's only a boxing match if you have two parties boxing with each other. There was no boxing being done on the part of the part of the police officer, and they were literally doing mock executions of Emmanuel Macron, and they had Emmanuel Macron on a fake guillotine. I mean, the whole thing was fake, but it was like this mannequin of Emmanuel Macron on a guillotine. Or they were walking around with guillotines, basically saying, we're going to behead Macron, we're going to behead the politicians, we're going to behead people who are against us. I mean, they were literally desirous of repeating the French Revolution. That was literally just a few years ago, 2018. And that movement continued on into 2019. And then 2020 pops up and it's like, COVID is here. Everybody has to stay home. Maybe we would have seen a revolution in France if there were no COVID shutdowns. If there wasn't no COVID lockdown, maybe there would have been another French Revolution. Who knows? But we saw it. We saw that revolutionary spirit. We saw just a sample of it, just breaking out from the surface of time and rearing its ugly head yet again. I mean, we just saw a little sample of it. It's just it's crazy, guys. It really is crazy. And it would not surprise me at all if the French have another revolution in the future. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.